the church needs and would benefit from lay help, particularly at a moment like this when people are predisposed to mistrust the bishops anyway, because some of them have failed so prominently to protect the faithful. What the church is asking itself now is how its lay members should be asked to exercise their responsibility. Cardinal DiNardo has been very concerned, as many of the other bishops have been, with what kind of structures or reporting issues we should be thinking about. The USCCB, for example, has at least floated the idea of a lay review board to examine charges against bishops, as we have done in dioceses with lay review boards for allegations against priests. Rather than look at this precise arrangement, I'd like to say a few words about the theology that underlies it and how far we might want to go in this direction. A lay review board that functions outside the ordinary diocesan or USCCB bureaucracy has a familiar air about it. To lawyers like me, it's reminiscent of the balance of powers created by our Constitution. Are bishops screwing up the handling of abuse cases? Well, let someone else check their misbehavior. Federalist number 51, Madison says, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But they're not even those who run the church. The solution the framers of the United States Constitution adopted was a separation of powers, where the constant aim, as Madison said, is to divide and arrange the several offices in such a manner as that each may be a check on the other. Consider, for example, the president. He can't do anything unless Congress appropriates money. He can't even make treaties unless the Senate ratifies them. He can't engage subordinates unless the Senate confirms their appointment. If he colors outside the lines, the courts will check him. That's the meaning of Marbury against Madison. Give the laity this kind of power to check the bishop, the theory goes, and we will solve the problem of abuse. Unfortunately, the metaphor is inapt for our church, which is not a democratic republic. In constitutional terms, it's an absolute monarchy. The Pope is the supreme lawmaker and the supreme executive and judge. He combines in one office all three branches of the government that Madison had in mind. Within each diocese, the bishop has similar powers on a local scale, subject only to the jurisdiction of the Pope. Frustration with the mishandling of abuse cases has led some Catholics to suggest that we should have a form of divided government. Let the clergy say Mass and administer the sacraments and preach the gospel, they say. The laity can run the other things, the building we pray in, the parish's finances, the discipline of villainous employees. There's much to recommend this arrangement, but it's not a Catholic one. Our church entrusts the bishop with three responsibilities: to teach, to sanctify, and to govern. What I hear from many faithful Catholics is that they want a decision-making rule. Being consulted is not enough. How can we give actual power and authority to lay Catholics in a church with a monarchical style of government? That's the problem. Here's a thought. I think it may be helpful if we set to one side the notions of power and authority and the use of constitutional metaphors, and approach the relation of the episcopacy and the laity from a different direction. At the beginning of the rite of ordination of a bishop, the people are asked to give their assent to the choice of the new bishop. And then, according to age-old custom, the bishop is questioned before the people on his resolve to uphold the faith and to discharge his duties faithfully. At the conclusion, the principal consecrator places a ring on the bishop's finger and says these words: "Take this ring, the seal of your fidelity, with faith and love, protect the bride of God, his holy church." It's hard to miss the nuptial symbolism. We often speak of the church as the bride of Christ, and through episcopal ordination, the Catechism says the bishop takes the place of Christ himself. So suppose we think of the relation between the bishop and his people as a marriage rather than as a government bureaucracy. What would that mean for their relationship? I'll give a couple of examples from my own. Last week, my wife was in Florida looking in on her brother. And after she got back, we were catching up on what had happened here and there. And at one point she asked me, did you go to Mass while I was away? I said, yes. In truth, I had gone Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, but I had slept in on Tuesday. And it began to bother me. In fact, overnight, it bothered me that I hadn't been completely truthful with her. So the next morning we were on our way to church, and I said, you know, honey, this has been bothering me all night, but I wasn't entirely honest with you about going to Mass. I actually blew it off yesterday. A necessary rule in marriage is that you have to be completely honest and transparent with your spouse. It's the only way to learn to earn trust and keep it together. And without trust, you can't build a relationship. And that's what we've lost in the current iteration of the abuse crisis. The accusations against Archbishop McCarrick and the widespread belief that other bishops knew and failed to speak out have caused a loss of trust. We in the church are like a suspicious wife whose husband comes in late and says he's been at work. Bishops must be transparent and accountable to their flocks, the members of their dioceses, as husbands and wives must be transparent and accountable to one another. Talking about authority in this relationship is a kind of category mistake. We're obliged to one another, if I can put it that way, out of love. If we fail in our duty of honesty, it will degrade our love. Eventually, we will pull apart. Bishops have begun to see this. The people who once went to Mass are skipping out or going across the street to the Methodist Church. Let me give you another illustration. When our children were little, it was my job to help them with their homework if they needed it. I handled some aspects of this better than others. I was a good editor, but I confess to having lost my temper regularly when I was helping Katie with her math. Some things she just didn't get, no matter how clearly I explained them, and so obvious were they to me that I was convinced she was being intentionally obtuse just to frustrate me or get attention. And it was at that point that I would start shouting and breaking pencils. And my wife would call me aside, and the conversation would go something like this: you might have missed this, but Katie is not trying to aggravate you. She's having trouble understanding fractions. Don't lose your temper. I want you to go back and apologize to her. Notice again that there's no issue of authority here. My wife didn't say, I'm in charge here and I direct you to do this and that. She said, I want you to. What she meant was, if you love me, you'll do this, and perhaps you'll come to see that I'm right. It was nonetheless essential that I should comply, and as a fulcrum, our love gave her more leverage than any legal or constitutional distribution of household authority would have done. Here's another analogy. At the wedding feast at Cana, Mary noticed that the couple were running out of wine and pointed it out to her son. He responded, this always gets me, what is this to do with me? My hour is not yet come. Meaning he was, obviously still living at home, hadn't busted out yet. Anyway, Mary didn't argue with him. She didn't say, look I'm your mother, and as long as you're under my roof, you have to follow my rules. She just said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. I love that. She didn't invoke any principle of authority. She knew her son would do what she asked simply because she'd asked, and not even asked, implied. And he loved her. Here's another one. Last weekend, I attended a meeting of something called the Leadership Roundtable about the causes of the current crisis. And one of the speakers was Cardinal Tobin. And he made this interesting observation. He said, being a bishop is the loneliest job. That's the first point that I made. What he really missed, he said, from his former life in the community of Redemptorists was the practice of fraternal correction. That's another metaphor for the point I'm trying to make. He used to have someone who would tell him what he should do out of a kind of family attachment. Now he doesn't. But he does, and that's the point that I want to make. Perhaps we should stop thinking about trying to find a legal solution to this administrative problem. There is no reason in canon law why a bishop can't set up committees of all kinds, made up of lay people from the diocese, to tell him how to handle bad priests, close churches, run schools, balance budgets, invest assets, communicate better. And the job of the committees would not just be to advise any more than my wife's job is to advise me on how to handle the kids' homework. She tells me what to do, and I do it not because she has authority over me, but because I love her. A bishop needs to think about the ring on his finger and heed the advice of God's holy church. Otherwise, the marriage is going to fall apart.